Let's take this show on the road. Same-ish, different day. I'll be bored out my mind. Hometown, love my place.
Hi friends, let's dye some yarn. Now, do you need to buy these undyed skeins to dye your own yarn? No, you don't. You can just buy undyed yarn from your yarn store. I've got some drops merino extra fine in a natural white. So I grabbed a couple of those and I skeined them, because you do need to skein them to be able to dye them. You can do these using any method you're comfortable with. I happen to have a niddy noddy, so I use that. Don't really need to have that. You can have someone help you out and just hold the yarn while you skein, or use the back of a chair, whatever works best for you. So the method is the exact same as dyeing any other yarn. So we are going to start with, this is superwash merino, so we are going to be using acid dyes and citric acid to set the color. So I'm going to start by adding about half a tablespoon into the plastic container. You can use any plastic container you like. Just make sure that the tools you use for yarn dyeing are not used for cooking food. And I'm going to add in 4 liters of water, which is absolutely enough for 2 50-gram skeins to get completely soaked. And you do want them completely soaked, because if there's any part of the yarn that is dry, it's not going to take the color properly. I'm adding in a zip tie to each skein to help avoid tangling, or to help detangle if it does tangle a bit. Putting one on each skein. These are reusables. You can find those on Amazon. I would just put them in the container. And I push down the yarn to make sure everything gets properly soaked. Like so. And it's going to sit for about half an hour, or at least half an hour, and then we're ready to dye. The yarn has been soaking for a little over an hour now, and we are getting ready to dye. I'm going to use a small pan today, since it's only 2 50-gram skeins. I have poured 2 liters of water here, which should be enough. We will see how much we need. We need some more citric acid. I've got an empty yogurt tub. I will add some water in that to put my spoons in after using them. I'll have this one to stir with. I'll grab powder with dye powder, the teaspoon. I got this little mixer thingy to make sure the dye dissolves properly. We are going to dye with pink from Colourcraft. It's an acid dye. It's actually a new to me dye. So we're going to try that out today. And I am thinking about possibly speckling with purple. We'll see. We'll for sure use the pink one. And while handling the dye powders, always wear a face mask to protect your airways. And I've got some gloves for when and if I need them. All right, let's get started. First off, I'm going to add just under a tablespoon of citric acid to the pan. Set that aside. And I'm going to add in water. So, and next we are actually going to add the dye directly to the pan, because it's such a small pan and it's really not necessary to pre-mix it in a different tub. So we're going to do that directly in the pan. we are ready to add in the dye. And of course, do you remember your mask now? I'm going to put that on. Okay. And this is what the powder looks like. Let's add some light here. There we go. Now you see it. Okay. Now I'm going to add just a teeny tiny bit. And we'll see how powerful it is. And I'm going to use this to make sure it dissolves properly in the pan. And even that small amount does give a light pink color to the tub. We are, however, going to add a little bit more, not this much. This is a very pretty pink. I think I'm happy with this color. There we go. Now we're going to add the yarn. Now I'm going to be using gloves for this because I will be putting my hands down into the pink water. And I don't want my hands to be dyed as well. I'll just pick up the skeins by the ties, squeeze out some excess water, and put it in the pan. And the same thing with the other one. And into it. Here we go. I'm just poking it, making sure that everything gets some dye on it. I'm going to turn on plate and start heating up the water and the oil. It is the heat in combination with the citric acid and the dye that makes the dye stick to the yarn. I can tell already that if I am going to do speckles on this yarn, we will need to remove some of the water because we need the yarn to be above the water level. And right now everything is submerged. That's no problem, we can do that later if we choose to. The water is starting to heat up now. I'm just gently gonna poke the yarn. Make sure we have dye everywhere. And we don't need the water to boil, it just needs to be hot for the chemical reaction to happen where the dye binds to the yarn. You can also use vinegar, but I prefer to use just citric acid because it doesn't smell. There's no smell at all. I'm going to turn on heat. As you can see, the water has pretty much, the dye has pretty much exhausted already. We're going to give it a few more minutes. And then we're going to scoop out some of the water. And we're going to add some speckles. I don't know if you can see it's steaming on camera. It's getting very hot now, so we're actually gonna go ahead and just remove some of the water so we can have some speckles. And I'm just using an old empty yogurt tub. These are actually quite handy when you're dyeing yarn. Empty that, and we're going to remove a bit more. Just going slowly, letting it exhaust a little bit more. There's no rush in yarn dyeing. It's actually quite meditative. Just take your time with it. I'll turn the heat down even more because it's starting to boil over here, and we do not need for that to happen. I'm removing water even though the dye hasn't quite exhausted completely. It's quite fine because I'm very happy with the color we already got. So it's okay if it's a little less to exhaust. And what we want to be able to speckle is for the yarn to be above the surface of the water. Otherwise, when the dye hits the water, it just spreads instantly. We do not want that. I think we're starting to get somewhere now. You also need to be careful so that you don't burn the yarn. Because the less water you have in the pan, the bigger the risk that the yarn will burn. Just turning it. Because I have an old stove, so parts of the hot plate it's harder than the others. So it tends to want to boil on one side. I think we can start speckle right about now. The yarn is mostly above the surface of the water now. I'm just going to pour out the water I removed. I'm going to put on some gloves. And then grabbing purple dye. I'm just putting a little bit of it in my hand. And we'll speckle. Just gently. Like so. I think that's just enough. Now I'm going to add a lid. Turn down the heat even more. And I'm going to add a lid to make use of the steam as well. And just let it sit for a bit. It's been sitting with the lid on for a couple of minutes. And we're just going to remove the lid. And I think I am happy with this. I'm going to turn off the heat completely since the yarn is already warm. The speckles will catch immediately. So we're just going to lift it aside and let it cool before rinsing. And it's very important that you let it cool completely before rinsing. Otherwise you will shock the yarn. So let it cool completely in the pan before rinsing it. So the yarn has cooled and it is time to rinse. So I'm using a plastic container. You can rinse directly in the sink if you want, or in whatever you have. I prefer this one. I'm adding a little bit of soap, which is my go-to for rinsing yarn. I do have the small ones in my web shop if you're interested. I'll link those below. And we're just going to fill this about halfway up. And we're using cold water, of course, because we need to have the same temperature. I think we're good. I'm just going to turn the pan so I can reach the zip ties. And I'm just going to pick them up and squeeze out some of the water. There we go. And the other one. I'll just pour this away. Just a tiny plastic container to put the yarn in once it's rinsed. And I'm just poking it a bit in the water. So we can find the zip tie. There we go. Dunking it, making sure the zip tie also gets rinsed. Because sometimes there's dye in those. And you don't want that to fall along. Now I'm squeezing out the water. Like so. And using soap, you don't really need to do this more than once, but I always do twice, just to be on the safe side. So I'm going to be doing this once more. Squeezing out the water. I'm not twisting or anything, just squeezing. Pour that out. I'm going to add some more clear water. Go. And we're just tucking them back in. Giving them another little soak. So, squeeze some water out. And the other one. I've got some really nice speckles going on here. And squeezing one more time without twisting the yarn. Bring it. So, there we go. Ready to hang up to dry. And it'll dry for a couple of days probably. And I'll be back to show you the finished result. There we go. The cutest little hand-dyed mini skeins, 50 gram skeins on commercial yarn with the purple speckles. I really like how it turned out. And as you can see, there's no problem dyeing even on commercial yarn. It's absolutely fine. So if you do try to dye on commercial yarns yourself, tag me in social media. I would love to see what you make and also what you knit of it. So tag me. I would love to see.